Yo, I'm Matt,
And I'm Joel,
and we're FringeCraft. Today we're going to be watching a video, Former Navy Pilot Details Tic Tac UFO Encounter from the Joe Rogan Experience. And it's an episode where Joe talks to Commander David Fravor along with Jeremy Corbell. And this is one of the most popular and well-known incidents regarding a UFO or UAP, and it was officially released by the Pentagon. Uh, so we know there's some validity and veracity to these claims. Um, so let's let's get into the video.
well, before we do that, don't forget, guys, to check out the Joe Rogan clip channel below. Like and subscribe to that channel, and give a like to this video and subscribe here, and leave a comment below. To let us know what you think of the David Fravor incident. This is a well-known incident. I hope you guys get some meaning out of this.
All right, let's get into it.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
So, what year was your incident? And you have a very, very famous incident that's corroborated by actual evidence, which is one of the rare ones. What year was it, and where did it take place?
So it was 2004, November 14th. It's really, if you draw San Diego to Ensenada, Mexico, we're about 60 miles off the coast in between the two. We're doing workups, so when we get ready to deploy, this was for the 2005 deployment. We were going at sea for November and December of 2004. So we had been out. I had just taken over the squadron mid-October, so I'd been the CO for a month. So we go out and we're putting the battle group pieces together. So it's not just the air wing, but we're on the carrier. We've got the cruiser. We've got all the support ships out there, and we're going to integrate all the defenses and train as one unit. So the exercise that we're going to do is an air defense exercise where there's good guys, bad guys. They're all from the air wing. So the bad guys today are going to be the Marines, VMFA 232, the Red Devils. So they're going to launch, and they're going to go about 100 miles south of the ship, and we're the good guys, and we call it a 2v2, so it's two of us against two of them. And we're going to work with the USS Princeton, which is going to be the controller, and they're going to control the blue forces, and then the red guys are going to give us a presentation that, they're going to try and intercept so we can stop them from getting up towards a carrier. So that's kind of the training set that we're all good. So the Marines take off first, and they start heading to the south. Now, we have no idea that for 2 weeks, the 2 weeks we've been at sea, they've been tracking these things coming out of the sky. And when I talked to the Princeton controller, he's like up to about a dozen of them. They would come down from above 80,000 feet. They'd drop down to about 20,000 feet. They'd hang out, and then they'd go straight back up after about 3 or 4 hours.
Now, when you say they've been tracking them, who specifically?
This is the USS. The Princeton was tracking them. They saw them on the Nimitz radar, and the E-2 could see them. Because they're out there, that radar's on all the time. And the Spy 1 system on an Aegis cruiser is, the state is probably one of the most sophisticated systems in the world.
So typically when something like this happens and there is some unexplained phenomenon, what do they do?
In this case, if we were in a threat environment, they would tell us. But we're off the coast of San Diego. It doesn't come to the air wing. So we have no idea that these things are out there at all.
So they observe these things, and they never bothered telling any of you guys.
That's correct.
So they just knew that these things had been visiting this area,
Yes.
but they just allowed this training exercise to take place anyway.
Yeah, talking to them, for the 2 weeks, they would show up, but it was when we weren't flying. So the typical carrier schedule is, for us, it was about noon to midnight. It's a 12-hour day. There's reasons for that. It can go a lot longer. But for training, we just do the 12-hour day thing. And it's cyclic ops, so you got guys taking off and landing periodically. So we were on one of the first goes. It's noon, 1 o'clock, somewhere around there, and we take off. The Marines take off first, and my buddy Cheeks, who's the CO of the Marine Squadron, he was leading the Red Air. When he launched off the carrier first, they called him up and said, "Hey, what do you got on board?" Well, the original legacy F-18s don't have as much gas as the Super Hornets. Super Hornet's about 30% bigger. So they start talking to him about fuel, and based on how long we're going to be airborne and everything else, they go, "Hey, why don't you just go ahead and proceed to your cap point?" Because we had just taken off. And that's when the controller had come up and said, "Hey," I forget our call sign. It's probably like dealer is usually what we went. So that'd be like dealer 11. This is Princeton Control. What do you got? Say your loadout. And I kind of chuckled. I said, well, I got a CATM 9, which is basically just a blue metal tube with a seeker head for an AIM-9 IR missile. It's a training. It doesn't come off the airplane. You can beat it with a sledgehammer. That's the only way you're going to get it off, or you got to unlock the lugs with a key. So I'm like kind of chuckling. He goes, "Well, hey, we're going to cancel the training." So we're like, okay. He says, we got real world vector and they're going to send us out to the west. So picture if it's, if you got a clock, the Nimitz is in the middle. We're a little bit south of that, about 40 miles south. And then the Marines are about 100 miles south of the ship, about 60 miles between the two of us. So as this is all happening, my wingman is joining up, and these are F-18F, so there's 2 people in each jet. So it's me and my Wizzo, which is weapon systems operator, and I've got the other pilot and the weapon systems operator in the other jet. So they tell us all this, hey, we're going to real world vector, and they send us out 270 about 60 miles away from where we're going. So now we're going out even further out to sea. We have no idea what we're intercepting, and this is when the controller starts talking to us. He says, hey, sir, we've seen these objects. For 2 weeks, they've been coming down, and he's giving us the whole story. He says, we need you to go investigate. We want to know what these are. So,
but they're asking you to investigate in a jet that's unarmed.
That's correct. Yeah, we have no... And there's reasons for that we don't fly. We typically don't fly with live ordnance unless we're actually going into like a combat zone or we're on a training range and we're going to shoot something. And the reason is you can go through history of the Navy or Air Force. If you put live missiles on airplanes and then you start doing training where you're squeezing the trigger, someone always messes the switchology up and someone gets shot down. It's happened multiple times. So we don't do it. There's times that we do, but it's rare.
It's practical.
So we start flying out to the west. Now I want you to think, because the other pilot has when you talk to, it's out there, it was a female. When you talk to her, here's the kind of goes through the mindset of, hey, we're off the coast of Mexico, real world vector. We have no idea what we're going to look at. Probably drug runner, because you get the drug runners coming up the coast. So we're like, okay. So we drive out, and they're calling down ranges. So they're telling us, hey, it's 270 at 30 miles at 20,000 feet. And it's, and then you just count down the ranges. And we're talking back and forth the whole time. So they get out to a point where they say, hey, merge plot, which means radars have resolution cells, range and azimuth of what the radar can actually see. Once you're inside that box, you can't tell the difference between me and the object I'm going at. We're just become one big blob. So they call merge plot, and so the other jet is on my left-hand side, and I'm going to go to a clock code to make it simple. So the object we're going to end up looking for is right in the middle of the clock, and we are at the 6 o'clock position, and my wingman is off to my left side, so she's further down with her Wizzo. So as we're looking around, we look to the right, and yesterday was a perfect example out here. The water is perfectly calm. No white caps. I mean, it's literally a perfect San Diego, California day. And we see whitewater, something like if you see a seamount, rock underwater when you're standing on the shore and the waves are breaking over it and you're like, what is that? It's usually because there's a rock under the water. So it looks like that, but it's about the size of a 737. It actually kind of has a shape of like a cross, and it's pointing to the east. So you've got the long part going east-west, and you got a couple of things going north and south. So as we're looking at it, because that kind of draws our eyes, we're like, oh, that's kind of odd. We look down, and the Wizzo in the other airplane comes up and says, hey, skipper, do you? And that's about what he gets out of his mouth. And I'm kind of looking at the same thing. I go, dude, do you see that? What is that thing? And what we see is this white Tic Tac looking object just above the surface of the water, pointing north-south, and it's going north-south, east-west. It's just radically moving forward, back, left, right at will. And it's moving around the disturbance, the whitewater that we see.
How big is this thing?
So, over time, it's about 40 feet long. And the way I estimate that is, I got a lot of time fighting other airplanes, so it's about the size of a Hornet fuselage. So that's why I say 40 feet. And this thing's just going left. So the first thing you see when you look down, you go, and this is with our eyes, it's not sensors, right? So we're looking down at this thing, and first thing you think is helicopter, right? Helicopters typically stay below 200 feet when we're out there, and they're just driving around. We're pretty far away from the ship for a helicopter for one of ours. So what is it? So the first thing you look for is rotor wash. If you've watched any TV show that starts kicking the water up, and you can see that it's really easy to see from the air. So we're like, no rotor wash. Matter of fact, don't see any rotors. Don't see any tail rotor. Don't see any, the main rotors. We're like, that's kind of weird. So as we're driving around, we're looking at this thing. We get to about the 9 o'clock position.
How far away are you from this thing?
I'm at 20,000 feet, and it's right down on the surface, right off our right side. So I'm probably maybe a couple miles lateral and 20,000 feet, and we're just watching it move around. And
so it's very small in your eyes.
Not overly small. An airplane down that low, it's 40 feet. You can see pretty well. It was pretty clear.
That sounds far away to me personally, but I guess he's used to that distance.
Yeah, I suppose as a pilot, especially if he's able to just guess its size with this level of confidence. I'd say he probably has, flown enough to make that judgment. But, basically what he's saying is there's two objects. There's something submerged under the water, which he's basically saying isn't a rock. Like, he thinks it's some kind of other craft. And then there's this Tic Tac thing that's like oscillating or, vacillating. It's just like quickly moving back and forth around. He didn't really, I guess, give a pattern, but it's just like back and forth, and probably doing it at insane rates of speed. And to him, it's not like anything he's seen before. He's like looking for any characteristics of any kind of aircraft that he would know about, and he's unable to distinguish anything. And I know you're saying he's like 20,000 feet away, but I mean, I think that probably, if we pulled up video from 20,000 feet up, even on a camera, you'd be able to see, like, make out enough detail to say, like, what something is. Like, I bet we could pull something up, but
That's true. I haven't. I have no idea what 20,000 feet looks like.
I can't give you an exact detail, but I
sounds
do.
far.
I like looking at videos of like people in helicopters like flying over cities, or jets like flying over cities doing different things, and you can generally like make things out from above on the camera. So your eye is significantly better than most cameras, and so I think I trust his instinct to say that it's not like something he's seen before, and that he's at least able to make out enough of what these objects are to say that they're out of the norm. So, all right, let's keep listening to what he has to say about this.
So I'm like, okay. So I said, I'm going to go check it out. That's what we're trained to do. The other pilot says, hey, I'm going to stay up here. And I'm like, that's perfect. So now we'll get some separation. We'll get it from different views. And the other airplane will kind of have a God's eye view of everything that's going on as I go down and check this thing out. So I start driving around, and it's still doing its forward, back, left, right. It's still pointing north-south. We get to about the 12 o'clock position. I'm just in a nice, easy descent. And a reason, because I've been asked, could you go more aggressive? You can, but when you're out over water, the water looks the same at 20,000 feet as it does at 2,000 feet. You don't, so you can easily put yourself in a non-recoverable position if you're not paying attention and you go into the water. So I got this nice, easy descent. I get to about 12 o'clock, and as I'm coming down, I could guess probably about, 18,000 feet now, a couple thousand feet below the other airplane. The Tic Tac just kind of rapidly goes boop and turns, so now it's kind of pointing east-west, and now it mirrors us. So it's above the surface, we're up high, we're coming down, it starts coming up. I'm like, well, this is getting interesting. So we kind of drive all the way around a circle, I'm descending, it's coming up, and I get over to about the 8 o'clock position on the clock, and it's over at about the 2 o'clock position. Well, the quickest way, as we know as kids, to get someone, you can keep going around the circle. Nothing's going to happen. You cut across the circle. So I'm about, probably 2,000 to 3,000 feet above it. And I just kind of drop my nose aggressively, and I cut across the circle. And it's coming this way. It's because I'm trying to fly to where it's going to be, because I want to join on it. I want to see how close I can get to it.
Right.
And as I'm pulling up, it's kind of starting to cross my nose, and it starts to accelerate. And within about less than a second, as I start to pull nose onto it and it crosses right in front of me, it just goes poof and it's gone. So I call the other airplane. I said, hey, do you guys see that thing? And they're like, sir, it's gone. We don't see it at all. So I'm like, okay, that's kind of weird. So we don't see it. We're looking. At the same time, I say, hey, let's turn around and let's go back to see what was in the water. Was there something there? So we turn around. We're right there. We haven't gone anywhere. It's gone. Water's perfectly, there's no white water, nothing. It's just blue. We're like, okay. So we turn back around. Now we're heading back out towards the east. And I tell the controller, I said, I first said, I'm kind of weirded out. And I told my backseater that. And we start heading back. And the controller on the Princeton comes up and he says, sir, you're not going to believe this, but that thing is back at your cap point. That was our original point where we were going to hold 40 miles south of the ship. So this thing has went from wherever we were at to about 60 miles in, maybe 30, 40 seconds. It's already over there. And they didn't track it. It just appeared. It shows back up on their radar and they go, it's here. So we're like, okay. So we fly back. We don't see it We don't see it on our radar. We don't see it on any of our sensors. We do like 2 runs and we come back to the ship and land. So as we're in we call it the PR shop. We're taking off our flight gear. One of my crews is getting ready to go out, and I think they were going to be on a tanker mission, but they had a targeting pod on board. So they launch off, and we're telling them about this before, and the backseater, Chad says, he's really determined he's going to find this thing. So he tells the pilot, hey, we're going to find this thing. So they're just out driving around, and in the back seat of a Super Hornet, there's no stick, but there's side stick controllers, and they're to control the sensors, because that's what the weapon systems guys do. And they can change displays really fast by just hitting a button, and it'll flip from the radar to the targeting pod. And the way the system actually works is when you see something on the radar and you designate it as your primary target, all the other sensors will look at that point. So everything is kind of synced together. So he picks up a hit on his radar, and he goes to lock it up, because I watched all the tapes. He goes to lock it up, and immediately the radar can tell, it gets signals back that it's being jammed. So, and technically jamming is an act of war. It starts jamming the radar, goes into a jam extrapolate, a bunch of stuff happens on the scope. Well, he's smart enough to castle to his targeting pod, and he takes a passive track. And that's the video that you see of the Tic Tac, where it's just sitting in the middle of the screen real quiet. So he does that, and he goes through, if you watch the video, if we had it, I'd go through it with you, but they go through all the different modes. So he goes, it's an IR and an EO. EO is TV. It's a black and white TV camera.
We can get the video, right, online?
One thing that I want to point out is, so they're going to show the video, but what he's basically saying is like the weapon system operator tries in this other plane that's following, attempts to auto track it, like use the built-in like tracking software, and it somehow jams it, which from my understanding, not just as an act of war, but is something that like other nation states don't have this capability, or at least this advanced of a version of it. But more so than that, like this guy's really excited, and he was able to do it using what they call the passive track, which is basically like he manually sets this square over the area that the object is, this UFO is, or this UAP, and basically tells it like track what's in this box. And that's what ultimately you see in the video, like tracking. But it's not just like some kind of tracking software that they had. Like he manually had to lock it in, and then the computer does the rest. I guess tracks to it and makes sure that it can follow it. But I mean, that's like within it, it's impressive, right? It kind of rules out, he's talking about real world vectors off the coast of California. It might be something like a drug runner, or who knows, but it's not going to be something that is going to have this kind of capability.
The other thing that's interesting is it showed up at their like gather point, like where
Their
they
cap
were,
point, yeah.
where they were going to go to anyway. So it's like it's almost flexing on them.
Yeah, as if it had some kind of like information on them, or like it maybe had intercepted their communications or something. And the fact that he was saying like it got there within 30 to 40 seconds, 60 miles.
It's a mile per second. That's nuts.
Yeah, but basically what it sounds like he's saying is they didn't track it as it went there. It disappeared, and then it was there. So like, it could have been there faster than that, but cloaked itself using some form of thing and then turned itself back on to their radar.
Let me throw this shameless plug in there. If you guys have not watched our metamaterials video yet, or the Trump and UFO video, those are both worth watching. They talk about like radar cloaking, and just the general technology in general, which, I mean, is it in use here? I don't know, but sure sounds like it. So anyway.
Also, something that I wanted to point out was like he's saying the other plane had a view. This is before they track it on the sensors and stuff. But when he was going to check it out personally, the other F-18 is looking down. He said a God's eye view, so he's still at 20,000 feet. But Commander Fravor himself and his Wizzo are like going down towards it. And when he goes down towards this object, it angles up and heads towards him, as if to say, like, it's almost like some form of consciousness or AI or something, like looking at, responding in kind.
It sounds like it's messing with him, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's just like
Well, when you say messing with,
chicken
like,
with him,
yeah, exactly. Like, it's responding in kind in the sense that it's like, okay, you have the audacity to come down and try to view me. I'll, like, meet your path. And like we've talked about in other videos, who knows if some of these UAPs or UFOs are manned vehicles or if they're drones. Like, at this point, they could be drones. Like, I've heard it brought up before, like, oh yeah, UFOs couldn't be visiting us because, like, you can't live in them for long times or whatever. And whatever arguments you have against that, it's like, well, they could just be a drone form of vehicle that comes and searches things out. So, I mean, it's just interesting. I guess the other thing is it could be some sort of, like, deep state, like, DARPA test that's going on off the coast. And they're just like, all right, let's confirm some of these capabilities on what they would even consider a real world vector, which would be, a highly trained F-18 Super Hornet pilot
on a reconnaissance mission.
Yeah, exactly, on a training mission that it's like there's no way it's going to shoot at us, so we're not going to lose like our hardware here. We basically just get to see their capabilities in scouting us out. And so that's another possible.
What a bizarre incident. All right, let's keep going.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's cool because it's very well documented, and the Navy and Pentagon and, our government has come out and said, yes, this is real. This did happen. This footage is real, and we're unsure what really went on. We can't really confirm, that we can't explain it. That's what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let's get the video, Jamie. Where would you can't show it to anybody. We can't show it on YouTube, but you can see it and people will be able to go to it. You know what we'll do? Go to the video and we'll tell people when we're starting, and we'll tell people what the title of the video that you get to is, and they can sync it up themselves if they're watching it.
It's publicly owned. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's publicly owned. It's, American government released
Right.
it. So it is actually something in the public domain.
So you think we could play it on YouTube and not get pulled?
Yeah.
100%.
You think so, Jamie?
It's a government.
Those things, I would say, yes, we should be able to, but sometimes those things get messy. So
Let's take a
I'd say
chance.
yes. Okay,
Let's
all
take a
right,
chance
all
with
right,
this one.
okay, all right.
I know if you find a New York Times article, there's a link to it.
It's a Pentagon release.
The YouTube is crazy with copyright stuff, and we've always been like 2 steps away from getting pulled off of YouTube completely. It's a real disaster. I understand from their perspective. There's a lot of legal issues they have to deal with, but
I have it on a private server. I could maybe send Jamie.
the issue, I believe, though, is the actual copyright of the video itself.
Oh, it's a Pentagon
released public
Okay,
domain.
and the Pentagon's going to come after us.
I don't think so.
I
But
don't think so either. Did you find it?
I want to find a good version of the video that doesn't have somebody
Jeremy,
else's
do you
copyright.
know?
Yeah, I've got
Okay.
an unwatermarked version. Let me just look it up and
this
send
one
it
has
to you.
tons of
Jeremy
Jeremy's
here,
to
if
us.
you
I
have
have
been
to figure out how to send it
keeping
to you right here. Give me a
tabs or
second.
paying attention,
Do you have,
this is the
AirDrop?
guy who did the
Or could you airdrop
Yeah,
it?
but I got it on a
documentary.
I got it on a
and
page.
He was also
private
on
page.
Joe
I can
Rogan's
send Jamie.
Oh, yeah, okay. Do you have Jamie's...
podcast
info?
with Bob
No.
Lazar.
Send-
I'll write it down.
Okay, I'll figure it
Or
out.
you
what
can send
guys
it to me and I'll send it to him.
Yes.
Okay.
That's pretty easy.
I guess they're just fumbling
Sorry
around
to
with the video.
disrupt the momentum.
no,
What's up?
you're good.
They're
But
just fumbling
I think this
around.
it's
Yeah,
probably
at this
important
point
to
they're
be able
just
to
like
have this
searching for the video and
the video itself, so you can just talk
verifying if
about
they
it.
can do it.
And we're about
The
to make it up
anticipation.
here.
Yeah,
Jamie
it's
wrote it
building.
down. There you go.
Thanks. Give me a second to get it out.
Okay. And for people who don't know, Jeremy also produced Bob Lazar, Area 51, and Flying Saucers.
There you
and
go.
he was in here when we had Bob Lazar in, talk about Bob's experience. And Jesus, if that wasn't a game changer for me and for a lot of other people. This is a subject that it's so easy to mock. This is why I think it's so important that we talk to people like you, because, like I said, just your average everyday UFO crackpot, they believe everything and anything. Had you ever had any UFO experiences before this?
No, the irony, and I tell this story. My mother-in-law, she'll be listening. She literally, every time I would go home, she would ask me, "Hey, did you see a UFO? Did you see a UFO?" And I'd be like, "No." And when I first started dating my wife, she was a big National Enquirer. She had all the supermarket tabloids, and I would always just feed her crap for it. So this happens, and I never say a word. So my friends all knew it was a great story over beers because they'd go, "Hey, what's the coolest thing you ever saw flying?" I go, "I chased a UFO." And they go, "Get out of here." I go, "No, seriously." And I tell them the story, and they're like, "Dude." I go, "Yeah." So I go home, and I got asked by Lou Elizondo to do the New York Times article, which, as like anything else, I always say no. It took a bunch of times to get me on your show. Jeremy kept asking, and it was... Thank
you, Jeremy.
It was you got to thank my contractor's wife, Angel, who we were at a party drinking, and she goes, "You got to do Rogan." I go, "What?" She goes, "It's the biggest podcast on the planet." She goes, "You got to do it." And I go, "All right, I'm going to do it. Just for you, I'm going to do this show." So
shout out to Angel.
Yeah, from New Hampshire. So... So my mother-in-law, we're sitting there, and I know the New York Times article is going to come out, and so it was at Thanksgiving in when the article came out, 17. So it was Thanksgiving in 2017, and everyone had kind of left the house, so it's just my wife and my in-laws. A couple of us sitting in the kitchen, and I said, "Hey, I got to tell you guys this." They said, "What?" I said, "There's going to be this article comes out in the New York Times, and I'm in it." And they're like, "Yeah." I go, "Well, I chased a UFO." My mother-in-law's like, "Ha ha!" She looks at my father-in-law. He's rolling his eyes, looking at me like, "Oh, are you serious?" And I go, "Yeah, yeah." And she's like, "You never told us." I go, "I never really told anyone." I mean, my wife and kids knew the event happened, but they didn't have all the details because it's just one of those things I just didn't get into.
Is it classified?
No.
Or was it at any point in time?
No, there's a lot of rumors out there that it was classified and the ship got locked down. No, it wasn't. We were never, men in suits did not show up. No one told us not to talk about it. And this is because there's a lot of other people saying other things. And I said, look at it. Here's the context. So in the battle group, you've got the admiral, you got the captain of the ship, the captain of the Princeton, and then you've got the other COs. So in position-wise, I'm probably, as a CO of a squadron, in the top 20 out of 6,000. And no one came to talk to me. No one came to take my tapes. No one showed up in a suit. No one told me not to talk. No one talked to any of my air crew that were involved in this. There were 6 people total involved, the 2 that shot the video and the 4 of us that looked at it for 5 minutes with our eyes. No one, nothing. It just, and I can get into how, there's a report that George Knapp got released. I call it the unofficial official report. And I had met someone, and I'm like, "Hey, can you find anything out? I had this incident." And normally when you tell people this, they look at you like, "Dude, what are you smoking?" And I'm like, no, I'm good. I'm tested. And they go, and they said, "Well, let me see what I can do." And I had got a call. I was doing some aerospace work, and I had gotten a call on my cell phone from a guy. And he said, "Hey, I want to investigate your incident." And I go, "Okay." So he did. He investigated the incident, and it was very, very thorough. I mean, if you've read it's about 10 pages long. And he tracked down everybody. He tracked down all the people that were the air crew that were involved. He tracked down the admiral. It was a pretty thorough report. And I didn't think anything of it, because the people worded it's out there, so they want to do FOIA, but it was never released in a FOIA request. I actually had the Navy call me. I'd been out of the Navy for like 6 years. And
let's explain to people that means Freedom of Information Act.
So I got called by a public affairs person from the Navy and said, "Hey, is this Commander Fravor?" And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Hey, do you know of any documentation on your UFO incident off the Nimitz?" And I said, "Official." And she said, "Yeah." I said, "No," because I knew the report existed, but to me it was an unofficial because I didn't know where it went. And I had a copy of it, but because it wasn't official, well then, years later I find out that the guy who actually did the report was part of the ATIP team, and I was talking to Lou Elizondo, who runs that program, and Lou showed me the documentation of the original. I think it's like 13 people that were part of ATIP, and they were FOIA exempt. And I'm like, well, that's hey, I know that guy. He's the guy that did the report, which is why it never ever came out until George got his hands on it.
How is something Freedom of Information Act exempt?
Obviously, DOD has the ability, because I'm I'm not a conspiracy theory person at all. I mean, I'll just tell you that. And I think there's reasons that the government doesn't tell the public everything. And I don't speak for the government, but I think there's a good reason for that, that not everything needs to go out to the public. But most of it does. And what they do is they put a clause on, hey, for this program or whatever we're doing, which would have been an ATIP program, the work that they do and what they find it's not releasable through Freedom of Information Act. There's probably other avenues to get that. And then you go, well, what really is freedom of information? Because I got into this I was talking to someone who's a conspiracy theorist, and they said, well, so-and-so wrote, and they're not getting any information on your event. I said, so what are they going to do? They're going to call up, you're going to put in your request for freedom of information. You go, here's what I want. It goes to some poor guy at the Pentagon who's like, I have no idea what this is. And he searches around. He doesn't find anything. He looks at his bud, and I go, for you. I go, hey, Joe, you got anything on the Nimitz incident? And you go, nope. And I go, okay, well, I didn't find anything. I looked. I did my due diligence, but I'm not going to spend the next 6 months of my life doing your research project for you.
Right.
So and you get nothing, and then you assume the government's covering up when the government really isn't. They just, the guys doing the research doesn't know where it's at or doesn't have access to it. So.
Makes sense. Jamie, we have the video? Okay.
I think it's
here we go. Now, explain what are we seeing and why are we seeing it in this particular.
Okay.
Yeah.
His disposition is one that I think lends to the credibility of this whole situation. Especially, when he says, like, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. Well, we don't actually know what he believes about this, that, or the other, but generally he seems to be a very level-headed, rational person who, worked for the government, or military for probably like 20 years or something.
I mean, if he's this high on the chain of command, it's likely that he does give the government or the military or the Department of Defense the benefit of the doubt because he has served them, with so much energy and diligence that he wants to give them the benefit of the doubt because he's serving their will.
Well, it's kind of reasonable to say, like, you shouldn't put all information out when there's other nation states and actors in the sense of, like, any terrorist organization would be considered an actor or non-governmental.
Yeah, I mean, overall.
So, like, you have all sorts of groups who are looking for things to exploit, and you might not want all information going to these groups, which, some actually are considerably worse than the United States government. I know that's hard for a lot of people our age to believe, but the U.S. government is not the worst thing that has ever existed. And there are some checks and balances actually built into these systems that keep it from being such a monstrosity. Barring the stuff that, Snowden has exposed and other things that clearly there's nefarious stuff that happens. If you think it's bad what the U.S. government does in, darkness, imagine what Russia, China, a number of other governments around the world that aren't even just Russia and China, but that aren't the U.S. do in, information.
Satanic
darkness.
cults, whatever, yeah.
Well, I don't even just mean that stuff. I mean, like, legitimate,
I agree.
assassinations, like, satanic cults. I mean, you can't really prove that, but you could probably pretty much prove people do get assassinated by governments, and it's like, they don't,
Yeah, I was going to say also about him is, like, to me, he comes off as trustworthy and pretty likable.
Yeah, I agree.
Like, he seems to be just telling, the story as he experienced it. I mean, that's my takeaway. I mean, everyone can make their own judgment, but I think we're ready to see the video, man.
Yeah, all right. Built enough anticipation. Let's watch the video.
So we'll just kind of go around. So if you look at the OPRs operate in the top left corner. NAR is narrow field of view, which is zoomed in. IR at the top middle, it means it's in infrared mode. So instead of seeing color, you're seeing temperature variations. Okay. And these things are extremely sensitive to in like tenths of degrees. They will tell you the difference due to color. So it'll go from black to white. So in this case, white is hot. So if you look down in the bottom left corner, it says WHT. That's white. It means white is hot. So the object that you're looking at is hotter than the sky around it. But what you also notice is there's no plumes. Now, if you're looking at an airplane, when you get closer, you'll actually see the exhaust coming out, and there will be a really glowing plume. That's important as we look at the video. And then most of the stuff on here you really don't need to know. What you can look at is the bottom right corner. It says 19,990 and a B. That's the altitude. And if you look up in the little words where it says HDG and then BALT, it's autopilot. So it's on altitude hold. It's just flying for that. So you can go ahead and play the video. And so those two bars next to the white object, that's a passive track. So what he's done is he's commanded the FLIR to track that. So what the system does is it uses, it's actually tracking, it can track pixels, and it's just basically block those hot pixels, those white pixels from the black ones. And then you're going to see now, pause it real quick. So up at the top, see it went to a white screen with the black object. This is a black and white TV mode. And if you look at the top, it says TV. So narrow in TV mode is actually, you can get closer than narrow in IR. It's literally narrow in IR is about medium in TV mode. So there you can get closer with the TV mode. So as you look at it now, in this case, you would actually start to see stuff going on. And even in TV mode, because you get exhaust, the black exhaust that comes out, you'll usually be able to see kind of some of that coming out of the back, and you don't see anything. This thing's just sitting there. And if you look at the top where it says 3 right, that's the pod is looking 3 degrees right of the nose of the airplane, right? So he's just flying along. The bottom numbers, don't worry, those are time. So it's 41:56. So go ahead and hit play. And what he's doing is Chad's going through all the different modes because he's like, oh, I got it. And he's going to try and see the best video that he can get. Now, there's rumors that this video is like 10 minutes long. No, what you're looking at is the entire video. Now, notice where it says 99.9. Mm-hmm. So hit pause real quick. What that means is while he's got the pod, the targeting pod, because that's his primary sensor right now, the radar is still trying to look at this object and trying to range it, and the radar can't get ranging on it. So the object is doing something to say, I'm not giving you back, because it's just a Doppler radar, just like a police radar is a Doppler. It's trying to get a ranging on you, and it can't do it. So when it says 99.9, the radar cannot see this object right now. It's not allowing it to get ranging.
And I think that's super important, Dave, the way he explained it to me. Active jamming compared to passive jamming. This is a technology that is actively jamming this system.
Rather than something like stealth aircraft, which is the shape and the texture of the...
Yeah, it's... Because everyone thinks stealth is invisible. It's not. It's a technology to basically make it harder for radars to see you. And that's the whole thing. If you look at, airplanes that are nose on are harder to see than airplanes at the sides. Kind of like, think of a barn door. If you're looking at the whole barn door, it's really easy to see. If I turn the barn door sideways where it's really thin, it's going to be a lot harder for you to see it.
Got it.
So that's the easiest, most basic way to look at this. So keep going. You can play again. And you can look, the airplane is still sitting at 20,000 feet. It's doing 250 knots. He's going to go through different modes and try and lock it. And it's just kind of sitting, and all of a sudden, as the video goes on, I think it's a minute and a half long. See, it's going to try and reacquire. It recenters the pod. So it's slowly drifting to the left. The Hornet is still going the same heading, just kind of hanging out. And they're just filming this thing. And then when they get close, it's going to zing off the left-hand side. When you see it on a full, because this, you think digital, you'd be able to get a one-for-one copy. Unlike, when you copy your album to a cassette, you lose a little quality. Well, you still do in digital world. And off it goes to the left. And that's pretty fast to leave that field of view. When we have big monitors that we look at these when they come back, so we're looking at the original tapes. So
play the end of that again, please, Jamie. So when it's taking off, how fast, when it just sort of like leaves the field of view and takes off to the left, how fast is that going?
I would say pretty fast. It's an estimate. If we had ranging, you could obviously do the triangle and go, hey, because we know how big the field of view is. But for something to leave the field of view that fast with the pod just staring is pretty fast. I mean, it's like out of here.
Like nothing that we have?
No, because we can't. I don't care what airplane it is. So let's just use the F-22 Raptor. That's probably it's probably the best airplane in the world right now, performance-wise. It can't take off like that, especially if it's a hover. I mean, you're talking something that's just sitting in space in the wind, and then it just all of a sudden accelerates. Airplanes don't work that way.
And it's not leaving any exhaust plume.
No, notice there's none. And when you go back to the IR
at the end,
even in the IR, you don't.
Yeah, see, there's IR zoomed in, and there's no. You would see a plume if that was an airplane.
It's creepy how it takes off.
Yeah.
With active jamming, it's intelligently controlled. There's no rotors, there's no plumes, there's no exhaust, there's no tail fin, there's no tail number. This thing goes from a standstill, takes off. It's a propulsion system we don't have in our inventory, and no other nation does. That's how it's understood by the government.
Now that's so if the fastest plane on Earth was trying to do that same maneuver, this system would be able to track it?
Yeah, it would stay with it. until it got to the limits of the pod, as far as looking to the left. But
Right.
and the radar would see it. I mean, you get close enough, you're gonna, everything becomes visible because you get burned through with radar and how radars actually work. This one is, you tell me, but this was performance beyond. I mean, it's like when we saw it disappear when it flew in front of my nose. I'm talking something. I'm within a half mile of it, looking at it, and it gets in front of me and just disappears. So we'll just go to something that everyone knows is fast. Let's just say SR-71 that's doing Mach 3. The visibility is 50 miles. So even at 35 miles a minute, I'm going to be able to see this thing turn into a little dot as it goes off into the horizon for probably a minute. The thing that we saw disappeared in a second.
And it was already at the
and that's from two different
destination.
angles.
It
Remember,
would
the other
appear
airplane's 8,000 feet
within
above me,
that
'cause
minute.
We get close to it at about 12,000 feet. So the other airplane's above me looking down, and when it disappeared, I said, "Do you guys see it?" And they said, "No, it's gone." It just literally was poof.
Damn, that's such a good clip.
Yeah.
It really is. I mean, it touches on so many things that we've already covered on the channel, like the radar cloaking, radar jamming. We'll have to cover, some theories about the propulsion system, but
Passive versus active jamming also, it's like basically he's saying something is specifically stopping the radar that's not, when he says passive, like I think a lot of what the passive technology is like the shape, the paint used, the maybe materials used. But when he says active, it's like there's some kind of device on this aircraft, like can I even call it an aircraft, on this thing, this Tic Tac, that's specifically not sending or capturing the Dopplering, whatever it is, sound IR, and not sending it back to the.
I wish that they had let David Fravor had talked about the difference between active and passive jamming, because Jeremy Corbyn was trying to get him to, and he was just like, let's play the video.
Yeah.
He didn't even talk about the difference. So he was saying passive jamming has to do with the shape, the profile, the radar misses it. Active jamming, he didn't go into. He didn't explain what it is. But
Well, so, like, I'm just trying to explain, like, basically, like, if you look at it, the F-117 or a B-2 bomber, they're, like, wing-shaped, and they have special materials and paint on them that make them a lot harder to see, and I believe their propulsion, like, they still use, like, jet propulsion, but their boosters, as with, I think that F-22 does this as well, doesn't put heat out in a way that makes it so obvious that it's a plane, so it's a lot harder to see when on radar and on devices that are going to pick them up. Whereas this thing has some kind of device, again, that actively is denying their radar instead of like just not sending back the whatever it is. It's like capturing, or maybe it's even like, interconnected with their device, and it's like set range to like beyond what it, no range, like don't give any response back. And so it's like a form of I think what he's saying is countries don't have that. Like, that's not a technology that is common enough even to nation states.
I mean, I'm curious if they're using some type of metamaterial for the jamming, or some kind of like Tesla technology to do the radar jamming, because John Trump was a radar expert, and like they have a mysterious relationship to UFOs.
Well, like, another thing is he brought up F-22s, and so, I mean, hypothetically, it is an F-22. Literally only the U.S. has F-22s. Like, it's our air superiority. It's the United States' air superiority fighter, which doesn't get sold to any other country, unlike the F-35, which is slower and, while still, supposedly a good plane, it's not as capable air-to-air as F-22s, and so even our best fighter and the SR-71, which is the fastest plane, I believe, of all time, going Mach 3, you're still going to have, either a radar signature or a visible signature where you're able to see it move out of view. Whereas their flare pod, like I was trying to explain, anything within the box that he had is, and he explains it as, it's just looking at the pixels. So it sees white pixels based off the heat, right? If it's black background and white pixels, it says any of these white pixels, we want to keep like this object with these white pixels, keep it in this box. And the object moves so fast from zero, like it's hovering, moves so fast it goes out of the box, which would normally capture a jet, like any kind of fighter.
Yeah, or a missile.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like it's something that's moving incredibly fast from standstill, which is, that's why this is such a powerful.
It's a cool
Encounter.
video for sure.
Yeah. And it's also like the most popular encounter. You can see this has been viewed 2.3 million times, but as compared to what Bob Lazar is talking about, like this is, while might be able to say Bob Lazar is like, I don't believe him, he's not credible. It's hard to say Commander Fravor isn't credible, that he's unbelievable.
I don't know. It looks kind of like a weather balloon, dude.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you could come up with all sorts of excuses that are pretty BS, but I mean, realistically, this is an actual case of a UFO, like an UAP, something that he even said ATIP like looked into it, and all their stuff is Freedom of Information Act exempt, so they didn't have to release it until George Knapp got his hands on it, which I think it's just interesting. You see these names which kind of reoccur because they either, I guess they're in on it, or they fight really hard for this stuff to be released because they think that there's something there.
Yeah, they know where to poke and prod, for sure.
Well, as a very interesting video, maybe we could do another video at some point in the future. I've seen one where this guy who writes, he's a former fighter pilot who writes books about air fights and stuff. He writes, almost like a Top Gun book or something. And he has a YouTube channel where he covers like the Air Force in media. And maybe we could watch something with him covering,
definitely.
this incident where it's like, okay, this is another fighter pilot who on his YouTube channel breaks down the situation and will explain it to you in a way where, similarly, it's a rational mind that the government has trusted with multi-million-dollar equipment that you at least know has some bit of ethos in this.
Yeah, they've
world.
got some credibility, yeah.
Yeah.
And guys, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Leave a comment about, what you think this Tic Tac is, or if you think it's possibly related to, some of the other videos we've covered on metamaterials or other UFOs. We appreciate it.
Yeah, I agree. Well, that's it for this video. I've been Matt.
And I'm Joel,
And we're
FringeCraft. See you guys.
Later, guys.